Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, and babies and non-baby children. So, speaking of babies, we're going to talk about sex and sexuality. So, just going to give a few thoughts about it. One, I guess we could say, I think it's, it's something maybe it's healthy not to talk about around kids, for example, because I do believe, some of that taboo around talking about sex. A lot of there's different taboos around sex, like, oh, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't say that, or whatever. And some of that, I think, in the West, we've moved towards this liberal sexual culture where it's like everything's fine. But I think, pedophilia is not fine, for example. So obviously there's certain boundaries, which are appropriate. And I think, say talking about sexuality around some people like kids, or around, say, some people where their belief system is radically more conservative, then I think it's appropriate to not, need to talk about it. But then around in general, between adults, I think, if you get feedback like someone's uncomfortable about it or they prefer not to talk, then it's like, okay, fine, we don't need to, make jokes or even have discussions, which get going, so nakedly to the core of things. But normally I think the general rule is like, there should be nothing weird about talking about sex, like among adults, and part of growing up is kind of understanding sex, and given that that's where everyone comes from, basically, and then to be able to understand it and then be able to talk about it, and say definitely once you're in a relationship and then you need to talk about that, or you need to communicate about what it is and what you want, what the other person wants, so you can't get around it. So yeah, let's see. I think it's a very powerful force, right? Reproduction, like animals have the desire or the impulses or instincts, the evolutionary drives, which have been selected for, like, there are, a giraffe's neck is long because it's been selected for. There's selective pressure on that. It's like the giraffes who had a gene which made their necks longer, they were able to eat more leaves because they could eat the low leaves, but they could also eat the really high leaves, which other giraffes couldn't. So they survived more, which gave them more chance to reproduce. But also they were healthier, and so their offspring were healthier and stood a better chance of living, and so on, and their offspring get the genes and can do the same thing. And so you have a thing where, that gene can proliferate really quickly and just take over a gene pool. Now, then I think probably what's also happening is there's some sort of elegant design of like divine intelligence driving and kind of creating changes. Like, my brother has a good line in one of his songs, like Plasticine Daydream. Check it out. Good song. Silver Hills, Plasticine Daydream. But there's a line in there like, playing God at the age of 3. Tell me, is reality just a dream? Like cowboys and Indians and their games of make-believe. So, playing God, little kids, when we play these games, I think, the universe might be doing something similar and just kind of exploring and creating, on some other level. So I do think, when things, certain things in evolution seem like there's not enough time for so many variables multiplying against each other. Like, a 1 in a million chance multiplied by a 1 in a million chance multiplied by 1 in a million chance. There's a lot of those where I think there's not enough time frame to allow for these things to have developed. There's certain anomalies which seem to show that it's definitely the selective pressure thing and just random chance, but it seems like there's also some other process going on with, like, divine intelligence. But hey, anyway, We're talking about creation here, so I guess this is relevant, yeah, to some extent. It's all relevant, kind of, but yeah, and so um, evolution has these selective pressures. Some things, they're more advantageous in a certain context, and so they just proliferate. But these drives, which have been found to be useful for organisms flourishing, there's survival, like self-preservation, and then there's reproduction. You want to, create more of you, which is basically survival in a longer sense. Okay, personal survival, no, you're going to have personal death. But family survival, lineage survival, yeah, you can have that. You could have lineage immortality in theory, or family immortality. And so, and then also, like say, conservation of energy, which, animals and beings seem to try to, and nature in general, just the path of least resistance, like lightning goes through the path where it can flow most efficiently. And so, but anyway, we have these drives, and sex is, reproduction, right? So it's very deep. It's not just humans, right? Like that's so deep. So many creatures have the sex drive. But then we also have these abilities of kind of self-consciousness, the ability to think, have analytical processes and memory and anticipation, where you're thinking about the future and the past, and you're kind of have these models in your head, and so we've got that logical kind of capacity, and then that wrestles sometimes with this primal side of us, which is like the sex drive is like one of the most fundamental of that. Kind of the reptile brain and the mammalian or super mammalian brain, the prefrontal cortex. And so, yeah, I think that's kind of interesting and pretty fun, really. I think a lot of the thing with sexuality is it's a doorway into connecting to your primal nature, the wildness or the wilderness of being a man or a woman, and just, you've had as much fun as you can have, basically. Well, actually, I think it's probably more fun to just be aware, properly conscious. But definitely feels very good. And then, after that, or in the midst of that, you can kind of explore different sides of yourself, and immediately afterwards, often you feel like, very refreshed energetically, and it seems to be very, very healthy for you, by the way, on various levels. But also, it's kind of like you've connected to this very grounded self. No one is like, or if there's been a good connection there, then you just feel very comfortable in your own skin, and then maybe you get more neurotic over time, and then again have sex, and kind of brings you down to earth, and so I think a lot of the goal is to use sexuality and as a gateway into our primal nature. And if you use it properly, like Tantra, you can go really deep into spiritual kind of awareness and oneness with your partner, kind of understanding like, oh, we're two branches on the same tree, and to experience yourself as the tree, or as God, as the universe. And that can be very healing on many levels also. But it's very powerful, and it's extremely pleasurable, and so it's very dangerous if you don't have the right approach to it, where people who are otherwise very empathetic and kind and reasonable, if they have the opportunity for sexual pleasure, or even if they don't have the opportunity, but they want they can see it dangled in front of them, it can cause them to kind of do pretty bad, selfish things. And, whether it's making someone uncomfortable or kind of damaging relationships or being dishonest and violating their own principles. And so you got that logical mind wrestling with the primal kind of reptilian brain. And so now if you can engage with that by just becoming aware of those lizard instincts in yourself, and use that, redeem that and say, oh yeah, okay, I am kind of like a bit of a mess in regard to this aspect of life. Okay, let's just own that and take responsibility for it and just admit it, let it soak in, and start to just, take them as it's a great learning opportunity, I think, to be able to, if you're a sleazy guy, and you're trying to, always trying to get women into bed, then to start to reconcile yourself with that and admit it, and kind of start to see that that's not really such an admirable, heroic, impressive, way to live. It's actually a little bit pathetic. Then, that's a great way to start. Like, if you can, it's an opportunity for your higher self to kind of become more powerful, because you have these primal instincts trying to push you around, and so you can start to see them as like, okay, these are my enemy, but in a playful sense, and be like, okay, it's a wrestling match between me and my primal instincts, and I'm gonna win, and use that as kind of food for spiritual growth and personal development, So yeah, and I think so. It used to be, it was just caged up, like for social, and it still is in many parts of the world. Homosexuality is forbidden, because it's like, well, that's just sexual pleasure, but you're not contributing to reproduction, which is what is required for the survival of the civilization. So a lot of civilizations have been like, let's just avoid that whole thing. Although many have, throughout time have, also embraced it or accepted it, but so what else? There'd be, like say premarital sex, or like, sex outside of marriage, or say adultery as well. These are things where, traditionally adultery is still now pretty frowned upon, as I think it should be. I think, if you want to sleep with someone else, you should have the nerve and the courage and the integrity, to just tell the other person, this is, I want an open relationship, or this is what I'm doing, or I feel like doing this. And then they can say, oh, why do you and feel like doing that, and you can talk about it, and maybe you'll find that there's another solution. Maybe your partner can actually change or help you change, or together you just clarify things, and maybe you realize you didn't even need that or want that, and you wanted or needed something in your own relationship. So, so let's say sex outside of marriage, like, I think there's a lot of benefits. Like, say Aubrey Marcus, who's really amazing. He talks a lot about open relationships and polyamory, and that, it brings up all these, heavy emotions like jealousy and, insecurity and stuff. But the ability, but it's like an accelerator. It accelerates your spiritual and personal growth. And, you can just enjoy the pleasure of life, and like, hey, we've got enough suffering. I think it's only fair that we get to enjoy life. When you realize, like, we are the universe experiencing itself, why shouldn't the universe have some fun, What, like, where is it written that the universe can't have fun, So I think, we should be able to enjoy ourselves. And I think we learn a lot from sexuality, just from the act itself, but then also in the social interactions around sex, which connect to leading up to it and finding a mate, and, during that and after, there's a lot of interesting social dynamics and things where once you can kind of learn from that or master that or just get experience through that, it feeds back into your wider life, and you can become a more mature person, a more confident person usually. Often I think, in general, men are masculine, in general women are feminine, and there is, if you want to understand what that really means, there's two books I highly recommend about sexuality. One is David Data, well, he's the author, David Data. It's a Way of the Superior Man. obviously for men that's especially useful, but I think for women also that would be very useful to understand, to see yourself. And he's basically, you know, it's like spirituality connected to sexuality. As there's this funny quote on the back, it's like someone saying, David Data must have the biggest balls in spirituality or today, you know, because he's kind of, you know, a lot of people, oh, I'm spiritual, but I don't really want to talk about this. I don't want people to think I'm being, you know, too lowly or something, you know. But he connects the high to the low, comes full circle. Forgive the pun. So yeah, and that's really good. And then also Passion Play by Felice Dunas, which is, she's like a therapist who connects sexuality to ancient Chinese medicine, and it's really profound, a lot of the stuff in that. And there's like, you know, practical exercises and things in both of these, but a lot of it's about kind of communication and dynamics. But in general, so the masculine, you know, is the assertive, giving force. The feminine is the receptive, open force, you know, that kind of, so the masculine leads, the feminine holds, you know. There's kind of these two sides of the coin in so many aspects of life. It's very interesting, kind of like a polarity or a spectrum, a continuum, and the masculine and the feminine are kind of the opposite sides. And it's very, so I think you can explore that a lot through sexuality, and say for men, through sexuality, you can come up against your own lack of masculinity, or your own, you know, excess of masculinity, and you can come to find a place of better balance through those experiences. And, you know, like role playing, being able to, you know, you might have to inhabit a certain character to kind of do what, you know, you want or what your partner wants, you know, or you might just say, oh, we're in the moment, let's just, you know, do this. But then that might open a doorway to an authentic aspect of yourself, which you weren't yet in touch with. So, so yeah, that can be a great learning thing, to kind of, you know, become more feminine or become more masculine, whatever is required or feels appropriate, you know, in each person's case, to find that kind of golden zone. So premarital sex or sex outside of marriage, there's a lot of benefit to that. And say Aubrey Marcus saying like, yeah, you know, it's very good, and, you know, it shouldn't be taboo. And I agree, but I also see value in what Jordan Peterson would say, which is the whole kind of idea that the whole sexual revolution has been actually pretty tragic in many ways. And so say the birth control pill, allowing women to have sex without, you know, much risk of pregnancy. There's that, and then there's the divorce laws, liberalization of that, where, you know, people can kind of get divorced. It's not such a big deal. Of course, it's pretty intense, but nowhere near like it used to be. And so, you know, I think in America, like half of American marriages end in divorce. And that's pretty heavy on kids, you know. Like I grew up, I was a baby when my parents got divorced, and that generated, I came to find like through, as I grew older, I realized I hadn't been aware of it, but there was a lot of trauma from that, you know, and kind of like unconscious heartache, which made me more evolved and stronger overall, but I had to learn from it. So I'm grateful for it, and I wouldn't change it. But I wouldn't, you know, recommend it on, there's many other lessons you could learn, you know, in life. You don't need additional trauma, especially these days. But, you know, I like to be practical. Like Jocko Willink says, extreme ownership. Just, you know, take ownership of everything that work with what you've got, you know. And so I think, you know, more divorce and, you know, birth control pill allowing, you know, more sexuality of women to kind of go and just enjoy sexual relationships with no prospect of, or little prospect of, or maybe just no thinking about long-term relationship with the person. Obviously, like we said, just for the reasons mentioned already, that can be very good in ways of helping people evolve and learn things and just enjoy life. And people who, you know, maybe they're attracted to each other, but they're not really suitable for long-term relationships, or maybe someone who they think they'll be good, but then they find actually they're not. In this day and age, they can find that out, and they can move in together and or travel together and find out, actually, no, this isn't going to work, and they can end it. But in the old days, it would be like, oh no, you have to be married first before you can get there. But the counter argument is like, maybe they would have found through, like, oh, I'm not sure actually if it is, there's some warning signs. I'm not sure if it's worth the effort getting married with this person. Like, I kind of feel like maybe we're not on the same page with some things. Maybe they put more effort into that before the sex act back in the day, But the main point just on here I'm trying to make, I guess, is there is Jordan Peterson and others make, and many women also, I can't remember their names right now, but have made the case that the sexual revolution, like there's someone Jordan interviewed on his podcast, for example, actually was not in the interests of women overall, and that, destabilizing the family. And, there's already a lot of technological changes and economic changes, political changes. There's a lot of pressures going on in existence these days, which they apply to everything, including families. But in addition, there's a lot of kids growing up without both parents around, and that can be hard. And then maybe they're growing up and there's this extreme sexualization of children, which seems to be part of, a lot of it's money making and like, but a lot of it's also just people feeling like, you want to be cool, right? You want to, be an individual, and you want to be, a rebel, right? But then there's a lot of monetization of that, people making money off of the clothing and the makeup and the, movies and the music or whatever that, glorifies that kind of thing. But the family unit is so vital to civilization that the fact that there are, say, a lot of women now who are struggling to start families. I think women all around the world, actually, there is a depopulation crisis unfolding. So there's this common idea that, the world is overpopulated and it's getting more and more. That's actually not true, which is really shocking. Again, Jordan Peterson had a podcast about this. He interviews a guy, his name escapes me, but he made a documentary, which I'm yet to watch, I want to though, called Birth Gap. And it's about how all around the world, for several decades, this has been unfolding, but not just in developed countries, but in Africa, all around the world, their birth rates are plummeting. But we're not noticing it yet because medical technology and, in many cases, income economies have been getting more developed, and so people are living longer. But you've got this graying populations where, people are living longer, so you're not noticing the populations shrink. But actually, if people weren't living longer, the populations would be in big decline already. The birth rate's too low, and a lot of this basically is, it's not that the average rate of children per mother is lower. It's that the average number of children per woman is lower. Basically, there's a lot of women who aren't becoming mothers. And you might think that that's fine, but the tragic thing is that the vast majority of them want to become mothers, but for one reason or another, they can't. And so, imagine, just put yourself in their shoes for a minute there, like you're a woman, your body is designed by nature for motherhood, that's one of the primal gifts of women can give. Like, men can't do that, can't make people. We offer, maybe get the ball rolling, but, women are so sacred in that sense, and being a woman, and yet you can't fulfill that purpose, even though you want to. And so why can't they? Well, part of it is medical. I think it was I'm going to get this wrong, but basically, some of it is like medical problems, like fertility rates dropping, and I think a lot of that's what's in our water, what's in the air, it's like, car fumes break dust from, when cars break, it creates dust, that goes up into the air, kills hundreds of thousands of people a year, maybe more. random chemicals which aren't really properly tested. The companies who are making money off it also are in bed with the regulators. That's in our laundry soaps, in our dish soap, and the floor cleaners, in the paints we're using, the plastics we're using, microwaves, all kinds of technologies which aren't particularly healthy for us. Processed food, not sleeping enough. There's all kinds of EMFs from Wi-Fi and other kind of radiation, like too much exposure to this sort of non-ionizing radiation. There are, the list goes on, but there's a quite toxic, there's a lot of toxicity in our environment in the developed world. So that's seemingly having an effect on fertility. But then also there is the fact that a lot of, it's much more acceptable now to not have long-term relationships and just to, express and experience your sexuality. And so that there's a lot of men, and to be very candid, sometimes, what makes men so amazing is this drive and this willingness for freedom and actualization and creativity and building things. But that has a dark side too, where sometimes you don't want to commit enough, and you don't want to box yourself in and be too grounded. And so, the way things have gone with the sexual revolution, it makes it quite easy for men to just have these low commitment relationships, and then leave a lot of women stranded. And then men, if you take care of yourself, the cruel, the kind of fact of nature is, often, I think if women take good care of themselves, and especially spiritually, then you can be beautiful until the day you die, But it's this strange, it's maybe not politically correct to say, but and David Data in that book does a great job of talking, capturing the essence of this. And I think also this guy on an Aubrey Marcus podcast, Michael Mead, I think his name is, that talks about mythology, does a great job of talking about this, but how there's a sacred beauty in the elder woman. But it is different to the full bloom feminine younger woman, and the maid, and so that doesn't age, well, you could say, like, the outer attraction, which often men are drawn to, it's a flower, and flowers bloom and they wither, whereas men are less beautiful, but maybe more consistently, like you can be take care of yourself, exercise well, and if you've got your your good personality, and often women are attracted to the personality more than just the looks. Not, of course, it's not black and white, but often it seems to be, as I understand it, that's a larger part. Whereas men are attracted to the personality and all that, but also quite a lot drawn to the physical looks, and part of that is connected to biology. We could say, but maybe men want someone who's very healthy to bear children. Women maybe want someone who is very productive and strong, but generous and a team player. And so, that's not the only thing going on. But again, there's that logical brain and the more primal instincts, and they're often dancing and sometimes wrestling, a bit like sexuality. So, the fact is, I think that's part of why women are finding it. Again, I might be butchering some of this, but I believe that's part of also why women are finding it harder to find mates. So there's the fact that it's more acceptable to have non-commitment in relationships. Then there's also the fertility issue, but then there is also that women are more educated and careers are allowed more. It's a beautiful thing, right? Obviously, that women are able to contribute to society and just experience the fulfillment of professional advancement and creativity, and kind of building things and doing traditionally masculine things of kind of just building and operating society physically and in terms of institutions and economics and all this stuff. And so women are becoming much the outperforming men in education, and doing very well in the professional world. But so then there's a lot of people who women who find tension where they might delay having children because of their career, but then maybe to the point where when they start trying to have children, they find, okay, they're trying to find the right person, and they realize, oh, it's actually, not as easy as you might think. And then suddenly you're 40 and you're trying to find someone to have kids, and, that can be difficult because then also the risks of certain developmental problems with a child start increasing as you get older there. And so, but there's not just that women, wanting, the conflict between career and family, but also that women, apparently, I think this is in the birth gap guys kind of conversation, women are more attracted in general to people, who are very successful men, right? Like there's a thing called hypergamy. I think this is a cross-cultural phenomenon of kind of mating and kind of, or courtship among humans, where men usually marry across and down hierarchies. They're happy to marry a woman of the same socioeconomic status, or a woman who, they feel a good connection to, who is lower in socioeconomic status than them. Whereas women tend to not, on average, don't marry and reproduce down the socioeconomic hierarchy, but across and up, right? So there's that balance there. Which is funny because that's actually, the masculine is top and the feminine is bottom. That's one of those dichotomies. So the men are going across and down. It's like they're on top. Funny. All right. So, so as women, more and more women are becoming very successful in what was formerly the male kind of world, professional world, then there's a increasingly shrinking pool of men who they are attracted to, because they're outperforming a lot of these men, and so then maybe just not as attracted to them. And try to resist your instincts. It's pretty hard, right? So what do you do there, where there might be some guy who's really crazy about you, but you're making $500,000 a year and he's making $30,000 a year, and it's just kind of a big turnoff, or it could be just academically, someone's a professor, a woman's a professor, and then the guy is, they would get on really well, but he's, the cleaner in the university, and she's like, yeah, I mean, or whatever it is, So I think that's another aspect. Anyway, so zooming back from that tangent, apparently the age of 30, something like some huge number of women at the age of 30 who want to have children aren't having children. And so that's one aspect of the whole sexuality topic, is that there's a lot of families that civilization requires to continue to, so we can, even if you think, don't be so serious, I just want to hang out and have fun. You can only hang out and have fun because other people have maintained civilization. And don't we want people to be able to hang out and have fun 300 years from now? And so if we don't maintain birth rates and the basics of civilization, that's going to stop, And, in Detroit, for example, you can see when the automobile industry vanished because they kind of, big corporations took it off to China to make more money for themselves, but, at the expense of the society. And then, and there's, or I guess maybe before that, there was already some rioting. And so, there come a lot of, I think, I don't know the details, but there's a lot of the middle class left at some point in the 60s, I think. But anyway, you had and then after the, you had the subprime mortgage crisis thing and on. But basically Detroit kind of descended into bankruptcy and ruin. And there were whole neighborhoods where only 10% of the houses were still full. And so, the municipality, like the government, they can't afford to supply buses, electricity, water, etc. So you can't just think, oh, that's fine, we can just have less people. Because it's like, well, services get disrupted, and then, there's more crime, there's vandalism, can get very dangerous. And so imagine that on like a kind of international scale, not so good, and just look at, one crazy guy in, Bavaria, chanting Sieg Heil, that can spread over a very, very large area if it catches the right momentum. So imagine what kind of dark momentum could come from certain parts of the world where there's a few snowball effects of, depopulation and all the chaos that comes from it. And, when there's trauma, human beings can get very dark, both out of a sense of vengeance against existence from, not giving them what they wanted and expected, but also just because, bad people have an opportunity to take over. So, and so both because, we want to be able to keep enjoying ourselves, but then also because, like, well, if we don't maintain a baseline, things get very dark, we need to maintain the birth rate. And yet our approach to sexuality seems to be that it, in the West at least, it's mostly about pleasure. It's not so much like Aubrey Marx is talking about of like, spiritual evolution. There's a lot of people doing that, but a lot of people, it seems to be about just pleasure, short-term pleasure, and just kind of being like, hey, the world's kind of messed up already. The government and the corporations are screwing us. I'm just going to have fun and just share, myself with, the people I connect with, and, what's the big deal? But I think the big deal, like I said, is, we have duties to society, and actually it's not so interesting to just be like, a party boy or party girl, like for what, 30 years or something, I don't know. I mean, I haven't done that, but like, in this life anyway, I don't know. But I think it's actually, really interesting to, kind of, as someone who, has become a father recently, it's actually really enjoyable to kind of move up. It feels like the next level of the video game, and there's still plenty of like fun things, but, and of course, like being in a long-term relationship, you can actually get much deeper into sexuality. You can, your partner much better, what they like, what they don't like, they know the same for you. And you can kind of explore things and experience things together, and it's much more meaningful, and you use it also to balance out, your physical health, because as Felice Jonas talks about in Passion Play, it's very good for your health, sex, but also, your psychology, like just, when one of you's in a bad mood, being able to kind of use a bit of seduction and, kind of pull them into this very exciting, alluring energy. It can be a way to kind of deal with the stresses and strains of just daily life, and kind of keep yourselves in a higher perspective. And so that's much more interesting, I think, than just using sex for, kind of pleasure and just kind of a bit of simple adventure. It's like the deeper adventure of like exploring yourself and exploring relationship and just creating like life. Like, we have our baby and she's going to grow up and do the same thing that we are doing, and you're kind of creating universes. Like, is, chasing skirt on Friday night really more interesting than creating universes? I don't know. I don't think so. And you can still chase skirt if you want, but within the confines of your own home, but, or, be chased. So yeah, I think, basically what I'm getting at is I think sexuality, very powerful primal thing. And, of course it's wonderful, but it does, and we should be able to share ourselves, if it's mutually consensual, then however we want, within, the natural law. So, I'd say, maybe the Greeks thought it okay to have sex with young boys, but I don't think, I think you have to be mature enough. True, some 13-year-olds might genuinely be more mature than some 18-year-olds or something, but it'd be very rare. So I think the law has to be that, like, no, like, the standard is set at a higher age, just to protect, like if you are really mature, okay, what's the big rush? You can wait a little bit. Whereas if we err on the other side, then there's a lot of harm that comes from it. And people exposed to sexuality too young, they lose their innocence. they're unable to kind of have the proper developmental process. And that's another thing, is like, I think we should keep our innocence even when we're older and we are sexual beings. Being able to say, see a beautiful person, but to not have to, just have the knee-jerk reaction of like, oh, that person's really sexy, but to be able to be like, oh yeah, that's someone's sister, that's someone's daughter, maybe someone's mother or whatever, and someone's friend, and to be able to see them as a human being, and even as your sister, be like, we're all brothers and sisters, right? Like human beings, and I think that can be quite beautiful if you see someone and you're attracted to them, then be like, oh, you're my sister, and it kind of can reset things. Or brother, if you're attracted to men, and so it should, I think sexuality needs to be in balance. It's not the be all and end all, and I think it should be, it is rightly subservient to like nobility, or whatever word you want to use for it, like coolness or awesomeness or authenticity or intelligence or freedom, like the right way to do things, the best way, it involves a kind of balance there. So, our culture, I think, but it's interesting because on the one hand, we're kind of glorifying, or like being like, yeah, sexuality is always good, whatever you want. But then, and so that needs to be in balance. Like we need to be aware, like that we need to treat people with respect, and that actually ourselves, we are kind of being led around like slaves by our reptilian brainstem at the base of our skull, which is kind of, what a pathetic existence to be a slave to some random automatic processes implanted by your genetic heritage. Like there's not even anyone there. It's just like these programs in your brain, and you're in control. You're being controlled by evolutionary programs. Like that's, you can't do better than that, So someone might think like, oh yeah, I'm a big pimp, I go and I sleep with all these women, and it's like, okay, look, it can be impressive to be able to have a sexual conquest, so to speak, or seduce someone, but for both ways, or anyone, say both sexes doing seduction, or yeah, okay, you achieved your goal. That's on some level, that's admirable. You achieving things. Some people can't achieve things, so yeah, credit where credit's due. Yeah, that's good, but if it's all just about yourself and pleasure seeking, if everyone did that, life would be like North Korea squared. So how am I supposed to be excited for you about that, or respect that? Even if I can have enough respect to just not judge you, I'm not sure I can have enough respect to actually admire you there. Yeah, I think it's like, and it's, I think a lot of the people who are doing that, like say Russell Brand would be a good example. He was like, a sex addict, and the British comedian, and, he's got a podcast, got a great show on YouTube and podcast, Under the Skin, I think he's on Rumble now, right? But he then kind of, got deep into, like, he kind of woke up from that, like, what am I doing? And got into spirituality, meditation, yoga. And now he's, during the whole COVID thing, he was like one of the voices of reason, like telling people, like, hey, this is what's happening. And with many, many other issues. And, I don't agree with him on everything, but he's doing great work, for the world. And I think people like that, people who are all, sex maniacs, a lot of that power, there's a great power in that. And that, the thing is, that could be devoted to more interesting causes, like Russell Brand's doing. So if there's any womanizers out there, or menonizers, maybe you could ask yourself, like, is there a higher goal I could be directing my creative energy at? Because if you're able to be very successful with, seducing people, there's a good chance that that intelligence, there's a sort of problem solving and emotional intelligence there, where that could really like do some crazy powerful things in the world, which you would probably enjoy more than just the same old, seducing someone. Again, if you want to keep doing it, that's fine. If you're, but I just say, hopefully you're giving more than you're taking, and you're not a vampire, and you're uplifting the world, and in general in sex, I think that's a principle like that needs to be learned. It's not like, oh, I'm trying to use you. It should be, I'm trying to give to you, and when you're both trying to give to each other, then there's this feedback loop, this crazy cycle where the energy just ramps up, and even Phyllis Dunas talks about this, and David Data, like it just massively recharges your batteries, like physically and on every level above that. And so so then on one hand, sexuality, like I think we need to be a bit more like careful to make sure it's got its right place, that it's not taking over our lives, like let kids be kids, and it should be cool. Like the kids who are like, oh yeah, I'm going and doing all this stuff. I don't know, like if I could go back in time and be like a preteen, I'd probably, be getting stuck into them, being like, I don't know, maybe not getting stuck into them, but I guess I could just say like, it seems like actually the coolest way to be a preteen is to not be interested in all that stuff. Like if you're genuinely interested in it, then all right, cool. You can explore that to the extent you want, but I think to everything there is a season and a time for every purpose under heaven, as they say. And so, it's like you don't want to be the 50-year-old who's hanging out with 20-year-olds, and you don't want to be like the 12-year-old who's trying to be a 20-year-old, like just, understand where you are and just kind of make the most of that, And again, everyone can live their own life, do what they want, but I'm just saying, I think these are things, I'm trying to get at principles which will make the individual happy, like anyone. But if they, everyone knows themselves better than, anyone else does, or at least can know themselves better if they pay attention and are honest with themselves. So, everyone should do what they feel is right. But I think I'm trying to get at principles which are good for everyone and for the individual, So I think, we kind of glorify sexuality, but like we're not glorifying like innocence. But innocence is incredible, like, and it can be very powerful. Like say, I don't know, a 16-year-old who's people are just talking about, oh yeah, this guy I really want, sleep with him, or I wonder what he looks like naked, or whatever, and then they're just like, oh yeah, like, oh yeah, what did you do on the weekend? Were you shifting some fella? But like, actually, I was reading Voltaire. You know Voltaire? Got some really interesting ideas. Yeah, really makes you think. But like, I suddenly feel strangely inferior. And then upon that basis, then you can really enjoy your sexuality because you're grounded in, you've got your head screwed on your shoulders properly, But yeah, again, everyone evolves, and develops a different timeline, so that's fine. So there's that, where sexuality, I think, should be kind of nested inside a deeper ethic, which is more like harmony or wisdom or being, moral, integrity, being a good person. And if you feel like, oh, what does that even mean? As Jordan Peterson has put it, at a very basic level, to someone who's, disenchanted or alienated with the whole idea of harmony or doing good things, or even believing that they exist, is whatever reduces suffering, everybody whatever makes the world more like heaven and less like hell. There's so much suffering in the world, and think of how you have suffered. And everyone acts as if their suffering is real. And you can say, even people who say, oh, I'm a nihilist, I don't believe anything matters. It's like the Big Lebowski, the nihilist, like, when the guys like surprise them and smash their something, or, or like tricked them and they don't get the money or whatever. They're like, but that's not fair. And he's like, you're fucking nihilists. So even nihilists take their suffering and their failures and disappointments seriously. They think it matters. So if you think suffering matters, you think therefore, the good, the belief in the good means a belief in the bad implies a belief in the good. The good is the opposite of that, or whatever limits that. And so, the good can be hard to see, but, the bad is very easy and tangible to see. And so, just notice life is suffering, as the Buddha says. And then, the good is, okay, let's limit that. Let's move away from that. And so, yeah, okay. So that's sexuality should be nested inside an ethic of, wisdom and kind of alleviation of suffering. But then also there is an extent to which the culture, I think, in the West is with sexuality. One other thing I'd want to say is like the whole thing of like consent and, people being like, oh, you should have to have written consent before you have sex with someone, because then they can, say, oh, no, or like you shouldn't be able to kiss someone unless you've asked them. And I think, look, partly it's coming from a good place. Some of it, I think some of it's coming from the desire to control people and tell them what to do and be bossy. But then, a lot of it's coming from a good place, a desire to help people and alleviate suffering, because there's people who, are molested or raped and, have terrible experiences with sexuality. But the thing is, a lot of the joy and healthiness of sexuality comes from not asking for permission. It's like the electricity when you're looking at someone and you're thinking, I want to kiss you, and I think you want me to kiss you. And you kind of get in a little closer and you're like, do they know what I'm doing? I'm like, oh, there's a twinkle in her eye. I think she knows what I'm doing. I'm pretty sure, she wants me to kiss. And there's a certain leap of faith when you lean forward, and there's a bit of a dance where you lean forward a bit, they lean forward a bit, and even with your words, you flirt a little bit, but you make it subtle enough so that there's plausible deniability. If they like kind of close up, you can be like, pretend like they've misunderstood you, and they won't know enough. They're not inside your head, so they can't prove otherwise. And they know that they don't know, so they can't fully reject you, which is very, very painful, rejection, obviously. And so even with words, you put out a little flirt, but it's plausibly could not be a flirt, and then you could just flirt very obviously as well. But often what happens is, there's a little bit, but it's not totally obvious, and then the other person reciprocates, and they do the same thing where it's not totally obvious, and then you're like, ooh, I think they are flirting back, and then you flirt again, maybe a little bit more, just to test the waters. So instead of just jumping straight to kissing, you're kind of doing smaller increments, and then if they reciprocate again, it gets to a point where you're like, okay, there's enough feedback where it seems pretty likely they're into it, but there's a certain point where it's a leap of faith, and it's like dancing. You step in each other's feet sometimes, but the core issue shouldn't be like, is there consent, or did you ask for consent? It should be, are you coming from a place of giving and respect? Are you coming from a place of respect and harmony? If you're genuinely not trying to use someone, but you're trying to see, you're trying to engage in mutually beneficial, mutually voluntary exchanges of giving, then that's a beautiful thing. And a lot of the magic comes from not talking about it, just being a physical thing, the primalness of it, And so I think we don't want to get rid of that or like make that illegal or something, But so it should just be more focused on teaching the kids to be more respectful, and to kind of, I think, allowing them to be innocent longer would probably going to help them be more respectful and more mature in their sexuality. And so, maybe we threw out the baby with the bathwater a bit when we, turned away from the more traditional ideas of sexuality. Don't, kiss anyone. It's evil. You'll go to hell. But then suddenly it's like, oh yeah, you can have sex with strangers every day. That's fine. Well, maybe there's a middle point, which we should try to, bring the pendulum back to. Not all the way back to like religious extremism, but like somewhere just in the middle, a golden zone, And maybe we'll go back and forth like the pendulum, a little bit too much this way, a little bit too much that way. But we know the right direction is back where we came from, right, I think. But we know it's not all the way back. But we'll just go back, and then at a certain point, try to feel it out, much like sexuality, just sense our way forward. What else? Anything else important to say here? I think, yeah, talking about sexuality with like kids is very important. Like sex ed, I learned like, oh yeah, this is, contraception. This is how effective they are. These are STDs. Aren't they scary? There was nothing about, okay, how to talk to the opposite sex, or, and maybe you could do, a blind, like a thing like, okay, if you want to, you can let the teacher know. What? Okay, we don't get details, but like I don't know if it would be teachers or ideally this would be families doing it, I think, but because you know your children better, and what you want them to have there, but basically being like, okay, look, this is how to engage with, someone you're interested in romantically. These are the problems. These, you're going to be afraid of rejection. You're going to be afraid of this. But say I had an experience once where like I really was into someone, and I think she was really into me. But and we were like, in a pub together, sitting really close, and it was all like all sparks flying, very exciting. But I was just waiting for the right moment, And then in the end, it was like, all right, it was like, oh, time to go home, and I didn't do anything, and I just like, I was like, the moment didn't come, but it was like me, I was being passive. I wasn't being assertive. I wasn't being yang, masculine, and that was extremely painful as a lesson. I was just like hated myself after. But then I realized like, oh, that's part of it. And so, you learn these things on your own. But I think, that's one thing where parents can kind of take the edges off sexuality for kids, is to kind of explain as they're getting older, hey, you're probably getting attracted to girls if you're a boy in general. Of course, there's some people are gay, and so you could try to tell them, hey, if you're gay, that's fine, just let me know, and that's a whole other deeper conversation. But for now, most people are heterosexual, so I'll just go with that. But definitely it's important, I think, to be open with your kids, and, whoever they are, to respect them as they are, but kind of, but also to be aware, not to make it weird or be like, what are you? You must know now. It's like, I don't know, some of these things could take time, but or you don't even need to define yourself too much. I think just be yourself. But to help kids kind of be a bit more aware of like, okay, these are some of the dangers. You don't want to get people pregnant, because then, like, what if you don't want to really be together, and or the kid doesn't have enough resources, and then you start fighting, and then it's like that Paul Kelly song, To Her Door. They got married early, never had no money. Then when he got laid off, they really hit the skids. Then then he started drinking. Then they started fighting. He took it pretty badly. She took both the kids. She said, I'm not standing by to watch you slowly die, so watch me walking out that door. Great song. But yeah, so whatever, many things where I think we should be, again, you don't want to go too much, sense it out properly, but I think, it would be beneficial just to give, not just telling kids about like, contraception and, diseases, but being like, hey, these are some ways, these are what, the opposite sex are attracted to in general, it seems. And maybe these are some opportunities, and these are some challenges, and just to help. And then I think that can take some of the anxiety out of it. And a big part of that needs to be respect and understanding. When in doubt, do nothing, but, err on the side of just, friendship or something, but anyway, so sexuality, anything else to mention at this juncture? Okay, I'd say that's pretty much, that'll do. Don't think there's anything huge I'm missing. So, right. Although, I would just say maybe I'm going to play a song here. But before that, I'll just kind of conclude by saying, like, I think, it's, my dad sometimes would make jokes about like talking about something that's good. And he'd be like, oh, it's the most fun you can have with your clothes on, And so, we're talking about the most fun you can have in general, perhaps under that definition. But I think, it can really help you develop, and, to be able to when you're in touch with your sexuality, and you can communicate with what you want, and you can even just explore things like power dynamics or things with your partner, which isn't part of who you are, but maybe you can just exercise that from your soul, and kind of like let that energy out. There's many primal energies in us which aren't us, but they're running through our psychology, and sexuality is a way to kind of channel them out and kind of siphon them off and filter them, and get perspective on them and experience them and see what it's like, and it's just a bit of play, but I think ideally, I think premarital sex, I think it's fine, but I think it must be, we should be teaching people and try to encourage in ourselves an understanding that the sexiest, coolest thing to do is not to be some player who's just going to disappear on people and says whatever is going to get them, to take off their clothes, but to kind of use your power more sparingly and try to be aware of like, what does this person want and what do I want? And, to ultimately, as much as possible, be kind of thinking, is this someone I could see myself, having children with? And if you don't want children, that's fine, but kind of think, do they, But I think most people do want children actually. And it's wonderful. I think it's really cool. I think, not just for yourself. And there's a bunch of people who would want children, but they think, oh no, but the world, imagine, what a messed up world. How could I do that? And anyway, it's going to hurt the world. There's too many people. There's not too many people. There's actually not enough people in terms of birth. So you'd be helping the world by doing that, balancing out civilization, keeping things calmer, and B, there's always problems. I'm glad I got born into this world, even if there's suffering, it's better than nothing, isn't it? So would you rather your parents had not had you just so that, because the world's not perfect? I don't think so. I think very few people, unless you're suicidal, then everyone would disagree with that and say, no, it's worth it. So it's worth it for your kids too, right? Logically. And anyway, you can, if all the good people and thinkers stop having children, that's just going to increase the ratio of crazy people. So if you want to kind of take care of the rest of people as an act of love, have some kids and teach them to be reasonable, respectful, conscious members of society that can help out everyone else down through time. So we can keep chilling and enjoying ourselves through time. So experiencing these things, but it's all good, but it should be in the background. We should be kind of, as soon as we can, think, okay, is this person someone I could be in a long-term relationship with and start a family with, in most cases. And if as soon as you start to feel like no, then okay, try to figure it out as quickly as you can. And once you're like, yeah, no, I don't want to be in a long-term relationship here, I don't want to have kids with this person, I would say, even if you're using contraception, you could get pregnant anytime, But even so, just, putting your time into that's opportunity cost that you both could be finding someone else. And even if you think that, oh yeah, I'll be able to find someone else, I can do another 6 months here and then just go find someone else. What about the other person? Are they able to do that? Or maybe the love of their life is going to come along in 2 months and they're going to go, oh no, thanks, I'm in a relationship, only to get dumped 4 months later, So you owe it to each other, I think, to kind of be honest. And if you think, the paths aren't meant to continue, it was just meant to be this far and no further, then, that's beautiful. Like I've had, relationships where it was really beautiful and deep and we learned a lot and grew together, sexuality being a big part of it and what brought us together at first, but where we both came to understand, this was meant to be this far and not further. The journey ends at death at the latest anyway, So what does it matter if it's a bit earlier? It's just, okay, we shared the road for a while and of course, I think most probably death is the end of one chapter and the beginning of the next. But anyway, let's keep it simple enough and say, you can share the road with someone, and that's not a failure if you end the relationship. It's actually a success if you can just be true to yourselves and understand what's helping you grow. And so if you realize you're not meant to be together, then okay, Godspeed, and kind of, gently, although it'd be painful, it's like medicine. It can be bitter, but it's healthy, and you're going to feel it's going to be sweeter in the long term, And and then you can go find better relationships, or relationships where it's just you connect better, you're more in resonance. It's not a judgment on the other necessarily. It can just mean it's not we're not similar enough, or we're too similar, or the ways in which we're similar, the ways in which we're different don't quite connect. Whatever it is, the connection, the chemistry, it's not quite right. So let's move on. And so sexuality is all good, but I think it does need to be subservient to relationship in general, and kind of emotion and just meaning, and a higher perspective of self-realization and expression of your potential in the world, which is much bigger than just an animal, right? You're a human being, so I think so individually we can do that, and we can try to encourage each other as a society to be able to enjoy the primal wilderness and power and insanity of sex, but then also balance it within the arms of emotion and empathy and ethics. Yeah. So, right, that's enough for now. I want to play The Book of Love by the Magnetic Fields from their album 69 Love Songs. It's like a 3-side album with 13 songs on each side. Really good. Another great song from it is, I think, Absolutely Cuckoo or something. Incredible. But this one, here we go. Let's shift this microphone, maybe make it a bit easier. The book of love is long and boring. No one can lift the damn thing. It's full of charts and facts and figures and instructions for dancing. But I love it when you read to me, and you could read me anything. Bit out of tune here. As Bob Dylan once said, "Oh God," that's how it is sometimes. bit like sex. All right. Okay. Back to the magic. The book of love has music in it. In fact, that's where music comes from. And some of it's just transcendental, and some of it's just really dumb. But I love it when you sing for me, and you ought to sing me anything. The book of love is long and boring, written a long, long time ago. And it's full of flowers and heart-shaped boxes, and things we're all too young to know. But I love it when you give me things, and you could give me wedding rings. Yeah, I love it when you give me things, and you ought to give me wedding rings. One more thing I would say about sex, I guess, is that much like music, sometimes it's out of tune, sometimes your voice isn't perfectly in key, sometimes your mind starts thinking like, oh, am I singing the song okay? And then there's always the primal, powerful choice to just swan dive right back into the music, and not take it too seriously, and just take it all as food for thought and feeling, and just the colors of life. And so, so I invite you to enjoy the gift of your God-given sexuality, and to embrace that as one chakra of 7, and, to know that it's by no means the only part of yourself, but it is part of yourself. And if you can learn to express it in harmony, and not to be deterred by people who are too extreme one way or the other, then you will be more in tune as a person and make more beautiful soul music through your actions and your choices and what you create in this life. So that's it. That's my thoughts on sex or sexuality. And thanks for listening, and enjoy.